rolling. Hold on. Morning, friends.
Good morning.
How's everybody?
We're
Here.
watching the snow.
Yeah, I live in Woodford County, and we got maybe an inch or snow, so it's really pretty.
Okay. Can you hear me when I speak? It's Jackie.
Yes, we were hearing you just fine.
Okay. My video is on a camera that's in the computer behind this screen. I teach online and I have a big screen, so undoing all of that mess just seemed too much. And my phone to hold it for a long meeting was out of sight. So you'll just have to guess what I look like.
That's okay. Are you able to see? I was going to do screen share a time or two. Can you see if we share some things?
Oh yeah, I see fine. I see you just fine. You just can't see me.
Okay, all right, that's all right. We do Zoom for our Sunday school too, and some of the ladies do that. They say, "I don't want you to see my haircut today." So.
Yeah, well, that is not the problem, actually. It just takes so much to unplug and put it all back together again.
Sure, that's no problem at all. Not sure if everyone knows everybody, so I'd like for us to go around just for a second and make introductions, and we'll just kind of let it go as we want to. We'll just kind of break in as we can. But my name's Jerry Utt. I serve as the stated clerk of our presbytery. So most of you folks are clerks of session. I do a similar task, but on the presbytery level. So like keeping the minutes and keeping the registers and all those kinds of things. That's the work that I do on the presbytery level. So we have similar things. Yours are more geared toward the congregational level and mine's more geared to the presbytery level. But so I'm going to lead our session today kind of as a reminder. And then I also serve as the pastor of the Troy Presbyterian Church in Woodford County. So I'm glad to be here and welcome you to our workshop. I'll let other folks just kind of introduce themselves and maybe tell where you're from. Yeah, Rogers has asked that I call on you. So what I'd like to do is I'll introduce the next one and then you introduce the next one. So Rogers, I'll call on you and let you introduce yourself and then you invite someone else, okay?
I'm Rogers Bardet. I'm the clerk at the Paris Presbyterian Church. I'm retired and I'm very busy, but I'm glad to be here and nice to see you all. Is that all I'm supposed to say?
And invite someone else.
I will. Mary Begley is next to me. So Mary Begley is next.
I am Mary Begley. I'm the clerk of session at Corbin Presbyterian Church. And I've been the clerk for about a year now. I'm learning as I go. So any information you can give me would be great.
Please invite someone else.
Barbara Morgan.
Hello, I'm Barbara Morgan. I'm clerk of session at First Presbyterian Church in Winchester. I'm serving, I have served previously as clerk, but I don't feel that we ever know as much as we need to know. So I'm looking forward to this event today as a refresher and perhaps a way that I'll be able to help someone else take this job when the time comes. Thanks for doing it. I love sitting here in the snow and not having to drive to Lexington or Somerset. And I'll invite Jim Moore.
Thank you. I'm Jim Moore from the Presbyterian Church of Danville, and I've been clerk about a year, coming up on a year, and I still deer in the headlights kind of thing at times. But I'm thankful for this training today, and I'm also thankful that I'm sitting here at home and didn't have to drive. So thank you. Let's see, Melody Mitchell. You're muted, Mel.
Yeah.
Good morning, Melody Mitchell. And I'm like you all getting used to all this Zoom stuff. I'm from First Presbyterian Church here in Richmond, Kentucky. Retired school teacher, and I'm like a lot of you all. I've only been doing this about a year. Louise Murtaugh.
Okay, I'm Louise Murtaugh. I'm the clerk of session at Isom Presbyterian Church in Isom, Kentucky, close to where Jerry used to pastor. It is snowing here in the mountains and it's beautiful, but I'm not going down my driveway right now. I'm very thankful that this is virtual. I've been doing this several years, but I can attest to you that I still have those deer in the headlight moments a lot of times, especially when we switch pastors or something like that. And I think, okay, did I really keep up with all of this? I'd like to call on Lynn Irvin.
Hi, I'm Lynn Irvin. I'm the clerk of session at Beaumont Presbyterian Church in Lexington. I've just taken this over last fall, so I've only been into it a couple months. So I've really got the deer in the headlights look. Been on the session a number of times, so at least that part's familiar with it for me and stuff. But I'm looking forward to learning a lot today. How about Jackie Corbett?
Hi, I'm Jackie Corbett from United Presbyterian Church in Harrodsburg. I've been clerk of session about going into four years. 2 years of that time we've been without a pastor. So it's been an interesting journey. And I'll introduce Sue Finney.
Hi, I'm Sue Finney. I'm the clerk of session for about 2 weeks at Jerry's church at Troy Presbyterian. So although I've done a few other things in the Presbyterian church, never been a clerk of session. So I'm here to learn.
Invite another, Sue. Invite someone.
I will, let's see, Lois Gaines. Lois Gaines?
She's muted.
Yeah, you're sounding.
There we go.
Okay. Oh.
I'm competing with a vacuum cleaner, so that's why I was unmuted. But hi, I'm Lois Gaines, and I'm clerk of session at Versailles Presbyterian in Woodford County. And I can't remember how long it's been. Probably at least 10 years. So I'm anxious to find out what I've been doing wrong all these years. Let's see, who hasn't been? Emily Carroll.
I'm Emily Carroll, and I'm clerk. I was just re-elected clerk of session in Georgetown. I've been clerk for about 10 years, and deer in the headlights never go away. I always worry about what somebody 100 years from now is going to read in my minutes, because I've been looking back through old minutes trying to figure out how they coped with the flu epidemic. So it's been kind of interesting, but I can tell you for sure, I have gone through a change in pastor, and I can tell you that both Philip and Jerry are wonderful resources. Don't ever worry yourself about anything. Call. They're wonderful. Okay, Mickey. Where's
Yeah,
Mickey? It's been a long time since I've seen you, girl.
it has been a long time since I've seen you too. It's good to see you all. And I'm Mickey Hudson, and I'm at White's Memorial Presbyterian Church in Berea. I'm not sure if there's anybody else to call or not.
There are a few.
Laura,
Okay, can't see everybody.
there's a Laura and a Sarah and John. Yeah, let's invite Laura. Laura Wachter. Your sound's off, Laura. Laura, can you turn your sound on? There we
Okay,
go.
I'm Laura Wachter, and I'm clerk of session at Cynthiana Presbyterian Church. I've been clerk for a year now, and I'm still learning as I go along, and am anxious to have this training because I wish I would have done it last year and I did not. So I will pass this on to who hasn't been.
We got Sarah and John left.
Pass it on to Sarah then.
Hi, I'm Sarah Avenshine. I'm a session member of the First Presbyterian Church with Rogers. She's the clerk of session, but our minister just asked me to sit in on this training just because. So here I am.
I had a request about that some folks wanted to learn more about what the role of clerk of session was. So that's perfectly fine. We welcome you, Sarah, and be careful because they might make you clerk next year. So you have to watch.
I told Roger she couldn't quit.
Yeah.
John is the next.
Yeah, this is John Davis. I'm from the Midway Presbyterian Church. I don't have a camera on my computer, so I just have to get along as best I can. And I've been doing the clerk business for a number of years, but I'm interested in how we're supposed to report this year concerning all of our COVID situation. It makes the numbers look a little screwy, so I thought we might try to learn something about that. So be happy to talk about anything.
Hey, great. We welcome you. Did we get everybody? We're saving Philip for the last. I invited, if you haven't had a chance to meet Philip, he's our Presbyterian executive, and so I'll let him introduce, and then he's going to say an opening prayer for us.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Again, Philip Lotspeech. I'm the general presbyter for the presbytery, and I am extremely thankful for clerks and especially for Jerry, for all of you. As Jerry would probably say, I'm not the I tend to try to color outside the lines sometimes, and what clerks do is to, make sure that we stay in those lines as much as possible and do everything decently and in order, because that's what good Presbyterians do. So I value Jerry a lot in this work, because I know that I can go to him and ask him a question, and I'm going to get the right answer, the good answer, the answer that helps us keep moving forward in the right way and in a proper way. And when I think of clerks, I think that's probably a big part of your role to assist the session and the leaders to make sure that they know the way forward. So we don't don't run off the rails, and we don't find ourselves in a place that's precarious when it comes to our polity and those kinds of things. So I'm probably going to mute myself here and listen from afar and let Jerry run this, so you won't see me much. But you have a very valuable role to play. Sometimes I think people think clerks are simply note takers, or we take minutes, but the role of the clerk is way more fulsome than that. And I hope today will allow you to see that and allow you to kind of live into more of the fullness that the clerk's role has. And so I'm excited for you today. So if it's okay with Jerry, we'll go ahead and pray and get you going. All right, let's pray together. God, on this snowy Saturday morning, we are thankful for the opportunity to be with one another, even by this means. And as we've heard, thankful we don't have to be out in this weather, but we can stay in the warmth of our home and gather together as your people who have been tasked with helping guide our sessions and our leaders to make good and wise decisions. And we thank you for the order that you give us that allows us to do that, order that allows us to act properly and wisely, and to make the kinds of decisions that further your kingdom and further the name of your son, Jesus Christ, in our communities. We pray for Jerry as he leads today, and for all those on the call as they seek to learn and discern how God is leading them to be a clerk of their council, their session. All these things we pray in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen.
Thank you, Philip. Good words. I appreciate Philip's leadership too. We have different skills. And so in the work of the church, it's really one of those, you think about the imagery that Paul uses with the body of Christ, and we can't all be the feet or the hands or the heart or whatever, but we all have different gifts that we share. So these different sorts of tasks are all important, and we need all of them. And it's really kind of incredible when the people come together and we're able to do these things in a communal way. It's really, really incredible. So but I thank Phil for his leadership too, because he can do all kinds of things that I can't do. So it's good that we work together. I'd like to give you just a quick overview what I have planned for today, and always, of course, we'll answer questions or things as they come up. A couple folks did send questions ahead of time, so I appreciate that. I've worked those into our session. And then what I'm going to do today is try to cover the basic functions of a clerk of session in a local congregation. We have to realize, or at least keep in our mind, our churches span from maybe 5 members. And we've got lots of churches in the 100, 200 range. And then we have some churches 5 and 6 and 700, I forget the top number. But so we go all the way from 5 to 500 and even more. The larger your system, the more complex it's going to be. And what I mean by system is your congregation. So you may have, if you've got a 200-member congregation, you may have a finance committee and a mission committee and worship and all these different sorts of things. If you're in a smaller congregation, it's maybe 20 or 30 people, it might be the same 3 or 4 people that do a lot of the things. And so it's just different. Realize that the things, what we'll talk about, the roles and the responsibilities, those may get implemented in different ways depending on the complexity of your system. So just know that and know that that's proper and appropriate, because the more that you sort of have in play, the more sort of formality and those kinds of things you'll need to have. I'm going to go through some things, and I had planned this today as more of a discussion so that we can kind of talk about things, but I do have some written materials that I'll share. They have to do especially with the minutes and the record keeping and that kind of thing, because that is kind of a detailed thing. And that's when people think about the role of the clerk. That's probably maybe the main thing they think of. It's not the only part of the role, but it is a critical part of the role. So I have that spelled out, and I'll send those to you after, and also an article or two that I have. And then once you get that, if you have any questions or if you want to talk further, or, continue, I'm happy to do that. Emily, thank you for saying those kind words. You made me turn red or blush a little bit, but I'm really happy to help everybody as much as we can. And so that is one of the really incredible things about being Presbyterian, is we help each other. And that's an encouragement I want to say. As you get to know other clerks, or if you have relationships with folks that you've known before, talk to them and share. Like Jim from Danville, he's following Jean, and Jean was a clerk there 30-some years. So of course she's willing to help, and she's just a wealth of wisdom and that sort of stuff. So you use those resources that you have, call on other people, and I even do that. Like in the state of clerk and the presbytery level, if there's an issue that comes up or something I don't know how to address, I contact other clerks and friends I have and that sort of thing. So we all work together and we try to help each other. So it's really good. I had planned for this to be about 90 minutes, so I'm hoping that we'll finish around noontime, or it depends on the questions and things, how fast we move through, but if we get done sooner, that's perfectly fine too. So, but that's sort of my plan for today. I want to make this interactive a little bit, and so I'd like to ask you to do this poll, and please vote. You can see the questions there.
You need to define a long time. Sometimes a year is a long time.
I was going to leave you. Well, that's true. I started to put too long, but I didn't want to make that an answer. So, everybody had a chance. Okay. Share the results. Can everybody see? So we do have some new ones. We've got a good chunk that served a few years and then some that have served a little bit longer. Excellent. Excellent. When we think about the work of the clerk, we mentioned a minute ago, this is a partnership. So you're working with your moderator, if you're pastor of your church or whoever the presbytery is appointed as your moderator, if you're between pastors, this is sort of a joint work. There are some responsibilities. Many of the responsibilities of the clerk of session are actually session responsibilities, but the clerk sort of takes the lead in those. And so what I'm thinking about is like the membership roles and any sorts of things like that. Those are session decisions, but then the clerk sort of implements that or keeps the roles and makes sure they're up to date and all that kind of stuff. It is just as I had a question about who can be a clerk of session. It has to be an elder. So it's someone that is ordained as an elder. It does not mean, though, that you have to be an active elder. And what I mean is active is that you have a term on the session. So somebody like the Danville Church had Jean Harney as their elder, as their clerk. She served 30 some years. She wasn't always on the session then, but she continued in that role. So the session can make that decision if it's an active elder, someone that's among the class, or if it's someone that has already served as an elder that they elect to that position. The work is a little more complicated, or it's just a little more involved if the church is without or in between pastors, because that moderator person can help a lot. But if you have an interim, then the interim is maybe not as familiar with the congregation, and so the clerk of session role might take on a little bit more. I think Emily can talk about that. She's lived through, she said, a couple of different pastoral changes. And just tell us, just mention briefly, Emily, how you felt like the role of the clerk when the temporary pastor.
What, like you said, part of the role was acquainting the interim and the new pastor with the existing congregation, providing a little bit of history. And there's a fine line a clerk walks between providing history and telling people what to do. You've got to allow room for growth, but sometimes if you've already been there, you need to tweak it a little before you go forward. That was one of the things that I learned. I leaned on presbytery a lot for guidance. At the same time I was doing a pastor change, presbytery was doing a change on how they were going to do the pastor search. And so we were all on a learning curve, but God is supreme. He works wonders.
I've got another poll I'd like to share, and we'll do that real fast. There we go. I had a chance. Okay. That's actually good. It's okay. No one answered false, so that's good. And not so much is okay too. One person mentioned it's kind of a learning curve, or I kind of think it's on the job training too. And a lot of things are like that. You take a role and you think maybe you know what it's about or what you're doing, but as you get into it, you feel more confident as you go. So I think that's actually pretty good. I'll do one more poll and then we'll keep talking here. There are some particular roles of a clerk, and so I want to ask you this question. Okay. This statement comes from our Book of Order, which is one of the things, we'll talk about that just in a minute when we talk about resources and things. But it does define the duties of a clerk, and that includes recording the transactions, and that means whatever business or actions come before a council. And in our church, the councils are the session, the presbyterian, the synod, and then the general assembly, of course. We keep rolls of membership and required registers. We'll talk about the distinctions of that. There are rolls and registers that we keep, and we'll get to that. And then preserving the records. Emily mentioned earlier about looking back through 100 years ago when our churches were going through the flu pandemic, what that was like and maybe how they responded and things like that. I've gone to meetings before and someone will pull records from the 1780s, and they'll say a prayer that someone said, and 300 years ago almost. So it's really, really kind of neat to think about all the ways that, but the duties of the clerk are to preserve those records. And a lot of the earlier records, of course, were handwritten. So it's that very beautiful sort of script writing that they did and that kind of thing. Now we've gone to, mostly computerized records and that sort of thing. But it's really neat, and we have a historical society that keeps all these things. And so, but these are sort of the main functions of the clerk: to record the transactions of the council, to keep the rolls, and to preserve the records. There is a question, or just someone had asked me, what happens if maybe you can't attend a meeting, or the council, like your session, they could name another elder to do it, like it's the clerk pro tem. If you're in the congregational meeting, the clerk also is the secretary of the congregation, so that whenever there's a congregational meeting, the clerk keeps those minutes also. But if you can't be there that day, or if you're sick, or different things happen, the congregation can elect another clerk for the day, those sorts of things. I worked as a hospice chaplain. It's a medical sort of a thing. And they talked about the documents, like a medical record. And if it's not documented, it's not done. And so that sort of applies to us too, that without those minutes of the official minutes of the meeting, we can't say that we did it. So in one way, that's kind of silly because we know we did it. But for the historical record, it has to be recorded and documented and those sorts of things. So it's real critical that whatever happens in any sort of official meeting, that we have a record of it. And then those go into our minute books and those kinds of things. The work it's a joint thing. I said that a minute ago. There are two I want to just mention about the preservation, and this is something that you can ask me about later. All of our churches have access to what we call the Presbyterian Historical Society. That's in Philadelphia. It's like an archive of our church records and documents, so that any council can submit records to them. And the records mean minutes and registers and those sorts of things, those official documents. They'll be accepted. You have to contact them though ahead of time. You can't just send stuff. You have to let them know, and they expect it, and they tell you how to pack it and ship it and all that. But any of the documents, especially if they're older, and like maybe you have them, I know some churches, they might keep them downstairs in the basement or something like that. They can be stored permanently at the Presbyterian Historical Society. The Columbia Seminary Library in Decatur, Georgia, they'll also keep documents and records and photos and scrapbooks and all that kind of stuff. Our presbytery has records in both places. We've deposited historical documents in both places, and I can help you to do that if you want to do it. I encourage that. A lot of churches want to keep the records there on site, but especially if they're older and maybe a couple 100 years old or something like that, to know that they're safe and they're kept in an environmentally controlled environment, so that the records don't deteriorate and the paper crumbles and all that. But we do have access to that. So please know. They can also do things like if you want to have them digitally scan your records, they can do that. They can enter it, and then they'll send you back some sort of a disk or electronic connections, whatever. But they can do that. There's a fee for that because you have to pay for the time of the archivist to do it and that sort of thing. But that is a possibility. If you still want to have a copy of the older records, then they can help you to do that. You could scan them yourself too. Like you might copy them and then make PDF files or something, and then send the originals on to the Historical Society. But I just want to mention that as a possibility and encourage you to do that so that our records aren't lost. It's sad, some of our churches, like some years ago, the Vico Church in Perry County had a terrible fire. So all the records were lost and gone, from all the years. So that kind of stuff does happen. Water damage, different things. The tornadoes, we've seen, different parts of the country, tornadoes and things. So if you have them in a safe place, those records will be safe. So I just want to encourage that. There are
Jerry, I think that I believe that the Presbyterian Historical Society likes to get records about every 50 years. Their rule of thumb is the church should hang on to them about 50 years and then send them off for a safekeeping.
Okay, that's actually a really good thing. That helps us to know. So if we go about 50 years back, that's a generation or two, and then anything earlier than that could be stored there.
Right.
The church, like Versailles Church, Lois, if she deposits some records from 100 years ago, and then there would ever be a question if someone wants to know, a funeral date or a wedding date, something like that, they can still access those. It's not that they're unavailable. It's just that they're stored there safely. And then, so the church still owns those records always.
Right.
You don't lose them when you send them to them. They're still your records. Thank you for sharing that, Lois. Does anyone have any? I'm just talking here, so I don't know if anybody has any questions so far. It looks like Rogers has a question.
When you say the records are accessible, if they're 100 years, how are they accessible?
Yeah, I had one of our churches was closed, the Nicholasville Church, and I had a request from a young woman. She was baptized there in the early 90s, and she was getting married, and the congregation she was getting married in requested a baptismal certificate. So I contacted the archivist at Columbia Seminary because that's where Nicholasville records were sent. And I asked them to research. I gave them a time frame, like within these years or so. And so the archivist went through, reviewed the records of Nicholasville and made a document that, these records, and where it was able to find the baptismal date and the pastor that did it. And because of all those things that are recorded in our minutes, we keep track of, who was baptized and what day and all those things. And so I was able to provide that to them so that the young woman could be married in the congregation.
But if you have the records, if you have them scanned,
I'm sorry, please.
If you have them scan them for you and you have it on your computer, you can do that yourself.
That would be correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Are there other questions?
Are there guidelines if we wanted to do our own scanning?
How do you mean?
I mean, like what kind of equipment to use? What kind of a software to use? Anything like that? Anything to help us along?
What I was thinking is just maybe photocopies or something. If it's an old minutes book, you can just photocopy those. And then if you have a scanner or like the copier here at Troy will do it, you can put in, 30 pages and it'll make a PDF document for you and things. So something like that, or other people may want to do it different ways, put it on a disk or a thumb drive, or whatever works best for you to research. Jim has a.
Yes, I just want to say your local library may be able to help you. Our local library has a memory lab, and they have all that equipment there, all kinds of media, even old media. So you might want to ask them.
That's a really good point, and that made me think Woodford County has a historical society. Those folks would be of help too in the system. Right. Anything else? I'd like to share some resources, the things that you need to have in this work, and I put them kind of by order, I guess, of importance. So I want to show you this one first. This is our Book of Order. which is, some people think of it as our rule book or it's our guidebook. It's part, actually, officially, it's called our Constitution. Like the United States has a Constitution, so is our church. Our Constitution is in two parts. We have what we call the Book of Confessions, which is book one, which is our theology and the documents that are related to that. And then we have the Book of Order, which helps to order our lives together as congregations and presbyteries as a church. Book two. And every clerk of session should have the most recent copy of the Book of Order. This is the most recent one. Until this past year, it's been updated every other year. This year it won't be because the General Assembly, their meeting had to be virtual and they didn't recommend any changes to the Book of Order. So this book will continue through at least 2023. And I noticed that some of the newer books have a new title. They say from 2019 to 2023. So if you have this purple book, the Book of Order 2019 to 2021, that's the most current one. At least the clerk needs that, and at least the moderator, your pastor, whoever's your moderator of your session. So you need that to have your guidance. That's the first resource that you'll need. The second one is related to the session. There's what's called a manual of operations. Sometimes it's called the manual of administrative operations or something like that. That document is something that your session creates, and it spells out the church policies, the session policies, and any sort of structure. So like your committee work, if you have policies around your mission, your giving, anything like that, any sort of policies around employment, if you employ a youth worker, choir director, secretary, any sort of positions like that, all those things are in place in your manual of operations. That belongs to the session. So it's up to the session to make that manual and then also to make any changes to it or references, anything like that. Some of our churches, this is a newer thing, like within the last 10 years, that's not been a practice for years and years. So we've been kind of in a process of making sure all of our congregations have those. If your church doesn't have a manual, you kind of need to work toward that and to get that in place. Your moderator, your pastor can help with that. The presbytery can help to give you some templates, but it's really local and it's meant to be local so that whatever operations or structure your church has in place, they need to be in that manual. The next level of resource that would be helpful to refer to sometimes are your church bylaws. Those are the bylaws of the congregation. So remember I told you the manual belongs to the session. The bylaws belong to the congregation. So they have things in there like the name of the church and the place and that sort of thing. Also things like quorum for your congregational meeting, any practices around nominating, like what your nominating committee looks like, who's on it, that sort of thing. Those things need to be in your bylaws. Those belong to the congregation. So if there's any changes to that, it would be the congregation to make those changes. Also in the bylaws would spell out your classes of elders, how you do that if you do a 3-year term or a 2-year term, how many elders are in place, if you have deacons, any sort of thing, or if you have trustees. Some of our congregations still continue with the trustees. So anything like that would be in the church bylaws. That's helpful to refer to sometimes. Philip talked about the boundaries, or to keep us in the highway, in the lanes, so that any sort of thing that your church would do, you want to make sure that it's appropriate to the bylaws, and then if it's a session thing, to the manual, and then of course the Book of Order. So we're kind of going in different levels of authority here. So that's the bylaws. Some of the way we govern ourselves, if it's not spelled out in the church manual, if it's not spelled out in the Book of Order, then we refer to Robert's Rules of Orders as our parliamentary procedure, which is how we conduct our meetings and those sorts of things. That is less critical. I think most congregations are fairly familiar with that. if there's any sort of Robert's Rules parliamentary question, your moderator would be more up to speed on that. So kind of rely on your moderator. There are, the Robert's Rules just put a new book. It's like 1,000 pages and it's the 12th edition. I bought one, because that's in my role as presbytery. That's part of what I do. But there are simpler versions. They call it Robert's Rules in Brief or something like that. It's like the dummies version, Robert's Rules for Dummies or something, but it just gives you the basic motions and how things work. Remember what I said about the structure. The smaller you are, the less structure or the less formality you need to have. So Robert's Rules is not that big a deal. Folks can just kind of talk and agree and that sort of thing, and that's all fine. The more complicated you get, like on the presbytery level, we do motions and amendments and send things to committees and all that kind of stuff. So it's more complicated the bigger your structure is and the more people that are involved. So you may not want to get the Roberts, but if you want to know more about that, then that is available for you. And then we talked already about, call on if you have a question or something not sure, talk to your moderator, work together with your pastor, talk to other clerks, call the presbytery, just call on the resources that you have.
Jerry?
Yes.
You mentioned that the bylaws are to be, can be amended they belong to the congregation so that they're amended by the congregation. Is that set in stone? Because our bylaws are written so that the session can amend the bylaws.
Okay, I would need to look at that. Yeah, because the bylaws belong to the organization. So yeah, and I guess if you put in your bylaws, you give the session the authority to do that, and that's
Yeah. And the other thing too, that one of the things that we just went through this year with our bylaws is to make sure that your bylaws allow for Zoom meetings, remote meetings, both of the congregation and of the session. That's pretty critical.
Yeah, and that's one thing that a lot of our congregations, we never would have thought we would have to do what we're doing today with these Zoom meetings and that sort of thing. So that is a place. Some congregations I know already had some language around maybe they could do an email vote or something like that. But these virtual sorts of meetings, it is, Lois said, it's a really good idea to allow that in your bylaws so that then that's proper. Another place for it to be would be in your manual if you want. Your session could put it in the manual, and then that governs the session business so that they can meet in that way and that sort of stuff. But if you allow it in your bylaws, then the congregation can meet that way as well. So that really is. And what right now it's still proper because we're operating under the governor declared a state of emergency and such as that. So we're still operating under that state of emergency, which allows for sort of extraordinary things to happen as long as that's in place. So, but Lois is right. That would be a wonderful opportunity to look at your bylaws and revise them and allow for these sorts of electronic meetings. Other questions or comments about these resources? And does everybody have a book of order, the most current one?
Jerry, I have a comment on, I have a congregation and a session that are not into bureaucracy. So I have a really fine time trying to make sure I get all my I's dotted and T's crossed. But when I started, we didn't have a manual. And there are many documents, I mean, like our church deed, and there's some agreements on our trust fund. So I put what I did is I took the bylaws, I had bylaws, and I amended the last page to include all these other documents, kind of like an index. So that then that became my session manual. But a lot of things I didn't want to have to go back and look up all the time, a reference, and the session needed to have these documents. I included them even though they're not really procedural. But I didn't want them to be lost in shuffles along the line.
Sure, and that's something that's helpful. The clerk can help to do some of these revisions and things like that. If it gets to a case though, like Emily, where no one really wants to do it and that sort of thing, as much as possible to get the help of the leadership, so there's not just one person pushing this. That's always best.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I make them do the work.
Oh. Other questions or comments? Okay, we had one particular question, and I want to do that in a poll right now, so I'd like to shift to that. Ask you this question. So there you go.
No, it really should be.
All right, so you guys are brilliant. Sessions are required to keep membership rolls of baptized, active, and affiliated members. Those are, and remember what we talked about, it's a session responsibility, but the clerk, this would fall under the clerk's duties. Maybe if your congregation has a church secretary or staff members, things like that, they may help to keep up the rolls, and the session or the clerk sort of overlooks them or oversees their work, that sort of thing. Or it may be that the clerk does this in person. Those three categories are the ones that will be asked about on your statistical reports. So that as you prepare those for the end of the year, they'll ask you how many baptized, how many active, and how many affiliated. And when you're preparing your year-end reports, they'll give you whatever the last report number was. So like last year, maybe you had 12 baptized members and 100 active and 2 affiliated. Then you can add or delete and then come up with a new number. Your number is for the end of 2020, December 31. I want to explain the categories because sometimes it gets a little bit confusing. This is in your book of order, and when I send this to you, I'll put the book of order reference so that you can go and look at it if you want. But baptized members are those members of the congregation that have been baptized but have not professed their faith, and they're not active members. So that typically means infants and small children that are not yet active members. So the baptized members are the ones that are baptized as part of the congregation, but they're not old enough. They've not gone through the confirmation, that sort of thing, and become an active member. So then the church is expected to keep a roll of how many those are. And then active members are anybody that, any from teenager to as old as possible are active members of the congregation. They're baptized, they profess their faith, they can vote in congregational meetings, they can hold office, all the things of active membership, attend worship, all that kind of stuff. So that's the active membership. And then affiliated members are those members. The best way I think about this is maybe you have a person that lives in Kentucky, let's say part-time, but then maybe has a home in Florida and they go to Florida for a few months in the winter. They may want to be affiliated with a congregation in Florida for their time that they live there. And so that's allowed. What we do though, so that person would show up on the membership roll of 2 congregations. They would show up as an active member of their Kentucky congregation and an affiliated member of their Florida congregation. The only stipulation about that is an affiliated member can't hold office. So they couldn't be elected as an elder or deacon in the Florida congregation, but they could have that shared membership in both if they want. So I don't know how often that happens. Maybe it happens, more in retirement type communities, that kind of thing. Troy has some people that go away for the winter, but they just keep their membership here, and we don't see them for a few months, and then they come back, that kind of thing. So, but those are the 3 membership roles that are required that the church keep, and so that falls under the duties of the clerk to do that. The baptized role, and then the active role, and affiliated members. Did Jim have a question?
Yes. Do you have any further definition of affiliated, or is it expanded in the book of order?
Yeah. Let me get it for you. In the Book of Order, there's four sections. The G section, the F section, which is the foundations. W stands for worship, D for discipline, and the G is the government. So I'm in the G section in chapter 1, and then 0.04. So G-1.04, categories of membership, and it spells out baptized member, active member, and affiliate member. I had a question in the chat. Okay, and we'll get to inactive just in a minute. Philip's always getting me forward here. Patience, patience. Philip asked about inactive, and we'll talk about that just in a second. So active member, profession of faith, have been baptized in the membership of the church, and they participate in the church work and worship. So that's basically the definition. Affiliate member is a member of another congregation of this denomination or of another denomination of a Christian body. So it could even be an Episcopal person or a Methodist person, something like that, who is temporarily removed from the community where the congregation of membership is situated, has presented a member certificate of good standing from whatever congregation they're a part of, and then has been received by the session as an affiliate member. So this definition defines it as more of maybe someone coming to one of our congregations and saying, you know, I'm a member of a church in Florida, but I live in Kentucky for the summer and I want to be related to the Danville Church. And so you could add them to your membership roll as an affiliate member, even if they're Episcopal or Lutheran or some other denomination.
Jerry,
I'll put this.
Jerry.
Yes, please.
I was just gonna share to maybe help him. About 5 or 6 years ago, we had a student at the university, and he became an affiliate member of our church. He was like from North Carolina and came to Kentucky while he was here at the university.
That's a wonderful thing, and a situation that I hadn't thought about was someone like that, a student that's maybe from another state or even another country or something, and they come to our place, some of our, you know, anywhere near to us, and want to be connected to a congregation. That's a wonderful, I hadn't thought about that particular example. I was thinking more retired folks or something like that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Melody. Other things, does that make sense with those three roles? Rogers had a question that I don't know off the top of my head. Part of what we do with the membership roles is that's how per capita is figured. And so the per capita, you know, is the amount that goes to Presbytery support and Synod and General Assembly. And that's assessed per member. And so I'm not sure if per capita is on affiliate or not, or if that's just active and baptized members, but I will go and check that for you. It'll be later. I can't do it right now, but I will answer that and get back to you.
I do have a question. What about individuals that attend our church and have been regular in attendance for a long, long time, but have never requested affiliated association with the church? Should they be counted or not counted?
I don't remember off my head. I think there's a place on the form for other participants, something like that. And so you could count those folks there. Yeah, that's where I would count those folks. Another thing, since you raised that, in these days with this virtual gathering, Congregations are finding that people are connecting to them that they've never maybe known before. So maybe from another state, or maybe it's a member that grew up in the church and has moved away and hasn't lived there forever, but they're able to connect with this, virtual technology. And many churches are deciding they want to keep that. They don't want to stop, even once we're able to gather again. They want to keep this virtual presence somehow. And so congregations are starting to think about that. Like, who counts as a member? Do they have to be in our community, or can they be connected to us in this virtual way? And are they participating? Are they helping with the mission of the church? And I heard some congregations were telling me that even the folks that live far away, they were able to help, like with school supplies. They just ordered them on Amazon and sent them to the church. So even that person that lives 3 states away is participating in the mission of that congregation. So that really is a different sort of dynamic, and something that we hadn't considered before. That's really up to the session. The session decides its membership. And so, maybe this person that lives in Minnesota that's supporting your church, maybe they're a member of the congregation. I don't know. The sacraments are a little trickier, like how are they participating in that and that sort of thing. Even with virtual, they can follow the sacraments at home and do those kinds of things. So there's just some things to think about that we had not considered before. So maybe that's something that you can share with the elders of the congregation. Like think about that. How do we think about that?
Jerry?
Thank you.
You're welcome, Barbara.
Sue.
Oh, Sue, yes.
Unless Barbara's got one. Okay, so when I look at the statistical report that we're getting ready to fill out, there's active members, and then there's a spot for friends of the congregation. I mean, that's what it actually says in the statistical report online. So I'm guessing that these people you're talking about that might be worshiping virtually, but they're not active members of the church, if you would decide to put those in the friends category. And it's hard to know, I mean, unless people are signing in when they're, online, but so I guess, but that's what I'm saying. We're still looking at per capita things based on your active membership, correct? And that's, so these friends are not somebody we'd be paying per capita on necessarily, right? That you are a baptized or a confirmed or joined the church, transfer your membership, whatever that would be.
Right.
Okay.
And some congregations have folks, they've attended for years.
Yep.
So yeah, that would go in that category too. Those friends or whatever the title is.
They just never joined officially as a member of the church. Yes. Okay.
Any other?
Thank you.
Oh no, sure. Barbara, did you have one or?
Oh, I would ask, related to that, if they are friends, they're not listed and do not have to pay per capita. Is that correct?
I believe that's right on the form. I need to look at that to be sure, but I believe the per capita is based on the baptized and active. I'm not sure about affiliates. Yeah, they wouldn't charge for someone that's not an active member.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? That is the roll, the ROLL. Those are the 3 roles that the session keeps for the congregation. And now I want to ask you about registers. So I have a poll for that, and I'll let you answer this one.
Registers.
I think we got everybody. Ready? This is one where the book of order has changed over the last little bit. So if you've done this for a while, or maybe you were clerk of session some years ago and you started doing it again, the requirements are a little different. So the roles are the membership, and then registers is just a little bit different. Register of baptism, that's meant to be a record of all baptisms. So it doesn't matter if it's a child or an adult or whatever age you do it. If there's a baptism in the congregation, even if there's a baptism, like maybe the session authorizes a baptism, your pastor to baptize somebody in the hospital, or maybe somebody is shut in and they're ill at home and they request baptism. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the church building or the sanctuary, but it's any baptism that's authorized by your session. So there would be a register of that, so that the date and the person and that sort of thing. There's also a register of ordained elders and deacons. Whoever, if you have deacons, not all congregations have deacons, but whatever elders are ordained in your congregation, you would list their name and their date of ordination. And then the same for deacons, if you have deacons. It's also a register of your installed pastors. So whatever installed pastors in your congregation, that includes associate pastors or assistant pastors, that sort of thing. Any pastors that have been installed by the presbytery, and then you list their terms of service. So like for here at Troy, the register would include me as their pastor, and starting in March 2019, and then however long the term of the pastorate goes. And so that's part of the historical record that each congregation keeps. Now, Philip asked a minute ago about inactive members. There are, that used to be a register that we kept, inactive members. We had other categories of membership. That was done away with maybe about 10 years ago, so we don't do that anymore. Some congregations still keep that. That's information that they want to keep. There are also some congregations decide to keep, or sessions actually, this will be a session decision, that they might want to register of weddings, what weddings were conducted in their sanctuary. They might want to register of funerals, what funerals were conducted. They might want, I can't think if there would be other things, but if there are other sorts of registers that the session would want to keep, that's certainly appropriate. But the ones that are required are these: the baptisms, the ordinations, and then installed pastors. Do you all have any questions about that?
Yeah.
Maybe especially the inactive, you might be keeping that still. I can't tell. Lois, did you have a question? Your sound's off, Lois. We can't hear you. Lois, do you have to turn your sound on, friend?
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The role of inactive participants. That familiar to you at all?
Nope.
Is it? Have you heard of that before? The role of inactive participants? No?
We had what was called a role of inactive members.
Right. And at somewhere, and this was going back a few years ago, I was reading something that Grady Parsons had written, and he was talking about churches keeping a role of inactive participants. So I shook my head a little bit, and I did a little research on it, and I couldn't find much about it. Although you could order pages for your big book, your register book, that included the role of inactive participants. So I didn't know whether that was coming from, and it mentions that it's part of the book of discipline, or it's part, you can find references to it, but it specifically says on these sheets of paper that formerly known as the role of inactive participants. So I guess if I'm not sure what it is, or what it, obviously we're not supposed to be keeping it because it doesn't say so in the book of order.
Yeah, and that's one of the ones where, as the book of order updates from year to year, as the updates happen, some things drop off, some things are renamed. Like we love to rename things. We were ministers of words and sacrament, and then we're teaching elders, and now we're both. So it's like folks love to tweak things, but the roles of members, roles are the baptized, active.
Right.
If you have an inactive role, then it's fine to keep that, but you're not required to. And then it's the same for those others. The registers that you have, baptisms, the ordinations, and then the installed pastor, you can keep that. And if you want weddings or funerals or any other sorts of things, you're welcome to keep that. Maybe you want to keep Sunday school teachers, a register of those, or whatever it is you want to, that you feel like the congregation, the session wants to keep, that's fine. It's just not required that you keep. Philip had a question.
Yeah, no, I just a comment. One, so you know I'm paying attention. I'm actually, even though you can't see me, I'm actually listening. This is what I did in school. I would just jump in every once in a while to make them think I was paying attention. But on the inactive role, like for example, just as a comment, I had a clerk of session, or there was a pastor say that they've been getting requests from people, especially during this COVID time, to be placed on the inactive role. And so I think it might be helpful maybe to write one of your, ask the clerk and delineate this for people. But since that's not necessarily an option, their only option is to be removed from the roles. Most sessions aren't going to have an inactive role because it doesn't really do anything. You still have to pay per capita because they're still a member, even though you may classify them as inactive. It doesn't change anything about their relationship to the church. It's actually, maybe that's probably why they got rid of it, because there's really zero function of having an inactive role other than maybe to I think we used it as a before, when it was still kind of more of a thing, as a way of getting closer to removing people. So instead of just going from active to removal, we put them on an inactive role for a while, and then we'd feel better about ourselves when we took them off the role because they'd been inactive, for a few years. And then, so it just may be something to think about how we answer that, or how clerks answer that when somebody says, hey, this situation was, well, I don't like the fact that we're not in person, and since I can't be there in person all the time, I want to be on in the inactive role. And it's like, well, your only choice is to be removed from membership, not necessarily be on an active role. I mean, that may not be what you want to say, but that's kind of the reality of it, I think.
And I think that's a helpful comment, is that the inactive thing, we did, part of the, I think churches were asking, what do we do with folks that have kind of not seen them for a while, or they come once or twice a year, or something like that. And so we sort of had this category for them that, they weren't regular attenders, so they could put them in inactive. But then also, you didn't just move them, but you tried to encourage them to be active. So, the church was supposed to, and that was a session responsibility. How do you reach out to these folks, encourage their discipleship, that kind of thing? So I think it's like we didn't just want to just, cut them loose and that sort of thing. But it seemed like it just didn't work. I mean, people either come or they don't. And it's, of course, we encourage and try to build relationships and that sort of thing. But,
and Jerry, you might have answered this and I missed it, but do they still have in the Book of Order? And I could search real quick if I need to, but I know for a while it used to be that they had this quote unquote an active member was somebody who had attended within the last year or given within the last year. And sessions were supposed to kind of, manage their roles. And if somebody hadn't given or attended, they were supposed to be approached, asked, followed up with, and inquired as to whether they wanted to continue to be an active member. Is that still a part of it, or has that just kind of been dumped with the new form of government?
It doesn't say it quite that specifically, but where it talks about the responsibilities of membership, it has some words about that. And within, like within the year.
I say that simply because, and I get the questions quite a bit, or I see, because we follow the per capita roles quite a bit. And we still have a number of churches that whose per capita roles, and this doesn't benefit us all at all, so I hate to even say it, but churches that are carrying maybe 200 members, but they really have 50 people that come to worship and are very active. And so they're charged per capita for the 200 members they have on the rolls, but they haven't cleaned their rolls in probably a decade. So they're carrying a lot of extra weight, which either is a financial burden upon them, or they simply don't pay the per capita. Either way is not a good model for us to pursue.
What it says under the membership role is that the session, the session responsibility is to look at that role at least once a year and keep it up to date. And the clerk can help with that because the clerk, keeps the role and can make suggestions, that sort of thing. But it's to look to ways to remove a member. The member can ask so that they can either be transferred to another congregation or just say, delete my name, that's that. Or if they've ceased to participate actively in the work and the worship of the congregation for 2 years. So that date is still there, 2 years of it. And before that happens, the session is supposed to seek to restore them to active membership. And if that doesn't work, then provide a written notice that the church is going to, the session will remove them from the roll. So 2 years and some sort of a written notice.
Jerry, I've got I'm one of those churches that Philip is talking about that's got a highly inflated membership roll. And my people don't want to be removed from the roll so that when their obituary comes out, they can say they were a member of my church. Now, I can tell you personally, I am not going to go to the newspaper and make a retraction every time I see that. but I do have a highly inflated roll because people want to be able to say that. And that's one of those things that's a session responsibility that I refuse to do.
Some of the churches in Eastern Kentucky, I worked with them as moderating and different things, as the pastors would transition and things. And what happened to a lot of them is that, Eastern Kentucky, lots of folks have moved away for work and other sorts of things. So they might have members that had grown up in that congregation, but hadn't been back for 20 or 30 years, and they still considered them members of the congregation. And they were family. I mean, they were connected. They didn't want necessarily to remove them. The idea behind it, though, is that wherever those folks are, if they live in Indiana or Texas or wherever, we want them to be connected to a local congregation. So, but some of them too felt like, well, that's my church. That's my, that's where I grew up. So it's really complicated, and and that's the reason the session. It's a session decision. How to handle some of those kinds of things. And you can make a rule, but it's hard and fast. I mean, like, but that's Tommy or whoever. I mean, it's different sometimes when it's personal. People and the families and such as that. So it's not easy. I agree with you, Emily. It's not easy sometimes. Do folks have any other questions about the registers and the rolls? Those are a big part of the session, of the clerk of session responsibilities. Another big chunk of the responsibility are the minutes, and so I thought we'd spend a little bit of time on the minutes. Whenever I forward you the documents that I have, it will be much more specific. I just kind of want to hit the high points today. For a lot of you, you have them already, so you can go back and look how those were done. What I'm going to talk about today is just the requirements, the basic sorts of requirements. And anytime it can help you with that, I'm happy to do that. So the minutes, remember that the minutes, like Emily reminded us earlier, it's the permanent record so that she can go back and look at the minutes from 1918 when folks were struggling with the flu pandemic and what that, what the elders wrote about that or what their prayer concerns were, that sort of thing. We do have certain standards for the records. There's certain things that must be there. Things like the place and the date and the time and who was there. So you have a moderator, you make sure your moderator's named, you make sure your elders are named, whoever's present. If there are some elders that are entitled to be there, but they're absent, either they're sick or they're traveling or whatever, you note who's absent. So that you keep a full record of who should be there and who's absent. Each of you will develop your own system for your minutes, so feel free to do that. There are some sort of basic standards. We need the things in there like what I just told you, the time and the place and the date and those sorts of things. Also, if it's a called or a regular meeting, so if it's your regular monthly meeting, you say the regular meeting of the session of. If it's a called meeting, that's different because those usually have a specific purpose. So that you would say the called meeting of the session of, or the purpose. You spell out the purpose and for the called meetings. Those are often, if you have to, perhaps you want to act on a new membership or approve a baptism or whatever business item is that requires a call. You just want to make sure you spell that out. Another thing that your minutes must state is that your quorum is met. Each congregation and each session can set its quorum, and so you want to make sure that your minutes state the quorum was met. That lets you know that it's an official meeting of the session. And there are certain things that we require in the minutes so that they're part of the historical record. We've already mentioned like the baptisms or if the session approves a wedding, whatever it is, anything like that. You also approve or you note the sacraments. We require that the communion sacrament be noted every time it's observed. That can either be in advance or as a record. So like lots of churches maybe have it as the first Sunday of the month. What I do at Troy is I just put that as part of my pastor's report. You know, the sacrament of communion was celebrated on January 3rd, 2021. And then that's noted in the minutes so that it's there as part of the official record. We do that because the Book of Order requires communion done at least quarterly. And so that's why we note it and we record it so that we're done with it. And then any sort of membership changes, if you act on a member, if you dismiss a member, if you transfer them somewhere else, whatever it is that you do towards your membership, those roles and registers, all that will be noted in your minute. Any sorts of reports that come from your committees or your Presbyterian women, any group like that. If you have a Head Start group, report to the session, you know, whatever it is, whatever sorts of organizations are connected to your congregation. Maybe you have a parish nursing system or some sort of a mission outreach, whatever it is that's reporting to your session, those reports would be part of it. Your year-end statistics are part of it. That should be included. Report, you should include it as part of your minutes. I did a real basic kind of a minutes, and I thought I would just share that with you. It's real simple, but I just want to kind of give, for instance, oh yeah, there we go. Can everyone see those? I called them just sample minutes. I'll just let you read in the session of the First Church, small town Kentucky, met at the Fellowship Hall on February 10th. That just is all those things that we talked about. It's the church, the place, the date, and the time. I listed the moderator, the regular meeting, open with prayer, the elders present, and I did absent, so the elders present, and then a quorum. The minutes, if you had minutes before, the minutes of the meeting were approved. And the moderator reported an elder said that the church potluck at the date. It was changed, it was amended to January 24th, passed. The next meeting, business, the moderator with prayer. So that's a real basic structure for your minutes. It would be more complicated if you had other reports or if you had other sorts of activities, whatever it is, other discussion. Whenever we're capturing the minutes, like I said, each clerk will sort of have their own rhythm, or each, they'll come up with their own sort of system. It's not necessary that you record the whole conversation. That's actually impossible. So you can't say, Ted said this and Abner said that and Betsy disagreed and Chester didn't like that idea. And you can't do a blow by blow. The standards that come from Robert's Rules of Order, which is where we get these things here that we're talking about, is that you record the action and then you record what was suggested and record the action. So that's what I did in this paragraph here. Elder Smith moved a potluck supper. It was changed to a different day, and then the motion passed. So I didn't really go into any sort of, this one wanted that and this one then, and all that. You don't do the blow by blow. You just do what was suggested, what was decided, and that it either passed or failed. That's really as much as you need to put in your minutes. This is a historical document, though, so if it's okay if you put some other sorts of explanations, but it doesn't have to be a whole big lot. It's also a caution. Robert's Rules cautions that the clerk, it's not for the clerk to interpret the actions. So you wouldn't put things like the potluck supper, and that was a bad idea, but they did it anyway. And nothing like that. You don't put any kind of things that to interpret these things. You're just trying to state the actions, and then whether it was passed or approved. And there's a knack to it. You'll get the hang of it, and it's just meant to be concise and brief, and to convey the action so that people can go back and look at it and see what happens. There's also not any requirement that votes are recorded. Our system, part of our government is that it's a majority vote. So with 3 elders, two would have been enough. You don't have to record 2-1, 3-1, 3-0, nothing like that. There are some special cases where votes might be recorded, but that would probably never happen in a session sort of a setting. Sometimes the Presbytery, if it's a particularly contentious vote or something, there might be a roll call vote or something like that. But that's not something really that I've ever heard of as a congregation having to worry about. So you just put if it passed or failed, and that's enough. Does anybody have any questions on that? And it's meant to be just real simple. I just did a simple thing. Rogers has a question.
We get detailed reports from the pastor and from the music director and sometimes committees. And what I say is that the report is filed unless there's something I want to mention in particular. Is that all right? And it just goes into the book.
And that's how most congregations do it, especially now with the electronic records and things like that. It's real easy to put the documents together and make just one file and that kind of thing. That's what the Presbytery does. Whenever you see the packets that we do, we have all of our minutes and all of our reports and all that kind of stuff. So like after that meeting, the minutes of that meeting are approved, then all that goes together as one document, and Robin puts them in our book and that sort of thing. So that's how we do it. And then that way you don't have to refer to it. You can do it differently. Like if your minutes, if you want to document the report, then you could hit the highlights or the motions from it if there are motions, but you don't have to have the full report. But it's certainly fine to do it too, and most congregations do it that way because it's simpler now with the electronic way. The computer systems we have allow for that. Yeah.
Barry.
Yeah, I can't tell who's talking.
It's
Jackie.
It's Jackie. You mentioned that the Book of Orders says that we're supposed to have the communion quarterly. We usually do it monthly, but obviously with the churches closed, we're not doing communion quarterly. Should we be making note of the opportunities that Presbytery has given us online because every one of the services that you all have given us has included a communion. And I just wonder, should that be included somewhere?
That's fine. You can do that. You can either, like you said, the Presbytery is offering that, so you could make that part of your offering, that you provided that to your members, so that would be appropriate. It would also be appropriate to say in these pandemic times, we've not been able to do that, and just to make a comment that, you're aware of the requirement, but because of the pandemic, we're not able to meet it. So that's fine too.
I noticed in your minutes, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
No, go ahead. No.
Okay, you mentioned that you said that just the suggestion and the action, and you said that the motion passed. I did not see a second or anything like that from the motion. Do we need to include that or not?
You do not. Second is always assumed. If someone makes a motion and nothing else happens, then it fails. So you would just put that. You'd say Elder Smith made a motion failed. So yeah, but if you don't need to list the second, that's something that's sort of an old style thing that we don't do anymore.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did Philip have a question?
Well, Jackie beat me to it.
Okay.
As in terms of, the meetings I've been moderating, there's always like, okay, who seconded it? Who seconded it? There's a lot of time that's kind of sucked up trying to figure out who said what. And as our guru has said, our Greg has said, you don't need a second in a small gathering. It really is for larger gatherings that you would need that. And so I just thought you may address that.
In a smaller session, Troy has 9 elders, and so that's a small group. We often don't vote. I just say, does anybody object? And then say, no objections, motion passes. So people have the opportunity to an objection means, do you have other questions or other things you want to talk about? Do you want to offer other business, make an amendment, whatever. But once we get to, we've talked about it and have a decision, then that's our decision. So I just let it go with that. We don't actually even vote often. We just consensus and we go on to the next thing. So the moderator can help to make that flow. And that's one of the things I talked about. The larger your group, the more formal you have to be. So then in a smaller group, you can be more informal, and just as long as no one, and you just want to say that too to the elders, like, we're going to do it this way. And if anybody wants to do it different, then be sure and speak up, just make sure that you're part of it. Yeah. Are there other questions? That's kind of, I feel like we're near to the end. We've talked about the minutes, and the minutes, what I will send you is more specific and talks about things, and how do you keep your minutes booked together and all that. But if you have any questions about it, once we get going, please just contact me back, or if any of this part of our discussion, and as you go too, as you do it, if you run into something that you're not sure about or need help with, I'm always happy to help, and glad to assist as I can. Any final comments or other?
Jerry, I want to ask about the annual report.
All right.
We normally do. I know that our moderator has talked to you about it, but he asked me to clarify. So we have not put together our annual report for 2020 yet, because of course we don't have a meeting planned to where we can formalize it, nor have we elected new officers. We have in our minutes that we're postponing that until we're able to come in person, and everybody's just staying as is. So I've remained clerk, and the person who was going to rotate off has stayed on, and that kind of thing. So is that acceptable, or are you all recommending a different way of doing it?
Yeah, these are really pretty extraordinary times. So, each congregation can kind of sort through and do the things that they feel like they need to do. We realize some of our smaller congregations, and especially our older congregations, are really challenged with the Zoom and things like that. So that you can still have a congregational meeting even with the telephone conference. So it is possible to do it. But we realize folks are trying to do the best that they can. So if it's a few months or something like that, we think that'll be okay. If there's a way to do your report though, go ahead and do that. And then if your session has to approve it, in a month or two, that's all right too. If your numbers don't change a whole lot, what happens is if you, for some reason, and there's a lot of times there are reasons. If your pastor, if you're in between, or if you're changing clerk of session or something, maybe you don't get to the report before the deadline happens, then your numbers just freeze and they carry over to the next year. So if something happens, you're not able to do that report, it's not the end of the world, the things happen, but please do it as soon as you can, and then try to get back on track for the yearly, the next yearly time. Once the system closes, it closes. So you won't be able to do it again until the next year. But then you would have 2 years of updates instead of just the one. But hopefully for a lot of our congregations, the numbers don't drastically change. So it should stay, fairly steady.
Now you're talking about the statistical report, right?
The statistical report.
Okay, I was talking about the annual report from committees and all that we put out, and you meet in the congregational meeting, first opportunity in January to approve all the stuff that's gone on in the past year. Is that just our church that does that?
Yeah, that's a different sort of thing. That's your annual congregational meeting. And so that's up to you all to do how you do.
Okay.
Yeah.
As soon as we can. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was getting those mixed up. To me, annual report means the statistical report.
Sure, I understand. And I assume the statistical report is online and we can access it.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And if you need help with that, call or me or Robin, either one, and we can help you with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jerry,
Yes.
on the annual report that she's talking about, Wanda had a really good document, I guess, from the pastors' meetings that you all have weekly, of a different approach to providing a report to the congregation based on how we were actually doing things these days instead of having meetings. That I don't know if that would be, I don't know where Wanda, I'm not exactly sure the history of the document, but it was really nice. Some good suggestions.
If you send it to me, Emily, I'll include it to our email list and folks can look at it.
I'll do that.
Anything else? Any other questions? Like I said, if something occurs to you after we finish, or in a few days, or as you do have a question, please just ask. We'll help you as best we can. Anything else?
I'd like to thank Robin Justice for all the support she gives us too. She should be mentioned.
I agree with that. Robin asked me if we needed her today, and I said, no, enjoy your Saturday. So, but she helps a lot. She does a lot of behind the scenes things, and then she's the face of it too, like when you call, and Robin's the best, no question about that. Okay, thank you all. We're going to end our time then, and I'll say a prayer, and we'll bless you on your work. Good work, and like Philip said, this is it's really a good role. I mean, all of us have different roles to play in what we do, but the clerk is an important part of our work. So thank you all for doing that. Let's pray. Lord God, we're glad for the time we've had together. We thank you for our congregations and our presbytery, all the leaders, the elders and pastors, our congregants. We thank you for the mission in this place. What we're doing is part of that mission. So we ask that you'd strengthen us for our work. We pray that for our pastors and our elders and all of our congregations as they struggle in these uncertain times. We know that so many people in our country, in our state especially, are suffering and challenged. And so we pray that in some way we might share the love of Christ with our neighbors and those in our communities. Thank you and bless us for this work. Keep us safe. We look forward to our worship services tomorrow. We pray in Jesus' strong name. Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.